Welcome back to another edition of Beyond the Billboard. I'm Charlie Riley, head of marketing at One Screen, who's powering this podcast for us. My co-host, Greg Wise, is not here today, but we're joined with an awesome guest, Matt Sciannella. He's the director of demand gen at Refine Labs, and we're excited to have him on talking about the agency perspective of utilizing out of home. But before the show started, we had some good conversations. We always say we should hit record right away because all of our guests say some amazing things, and they usually go back and say it, but Matt had some really good takes on out of home and just brand marketing in general. But first of all, let's let you introduce yourself. I don't want to get ahead. I'm excited because you just had a bunch of really good stuff to chat about. But if you introduce yourself real quick, and then let's jump into maybe a little bit of a spicy take.
Yeah, 100%. My name is Matthew Sciannella. I'm Senior Director of Demand Gen at Refine Labs. We work with B2B SaaS brands on their paid media execution for digital. We also consult them on things like out of home. We'll also run things outside of paid social, do CTV, demand side platforms, things like that, paid search, obviously. But yeah, I've been, as someone who's been a tacit follower of out of home, I've been talking through it with a lot of clients. It's just things to do to stand out. I'm super excited to be on this podcast because out of home, I feel is making a bit of a comeback for a lot of brands. I mean, if we look at like Instant.io, Tom Wentworth's company, and they just ran a huge out-of-home campaign for a relatively small company, and he's getting like really great sort of brand effect from it. So I'm really eager to talk about this a little bit more because I think like we're getting to the stage in demand gen where like the move is to zag more than zig, and out-of-home is probably one of the ultimate zags, and just those kind of brand marketing plays are the ultimate zag, I think, right now, that I think brands largely who run the duopoly of advertising with LinkedIn and Google should be looking outside of those two channels to stand out a little bit more.
We didn't pay you to mention Tom and Instant.io's campaign, but we were happy to be behind. They've run an awesome campaign. Tom he's got great vision on how to be a little different and zag, like you said. Yeah. So it's
you guys did the incident campaign?
We did, yes.
Oh man, I'm excited. I don't want to get off of talking to me, but I would love to hear more detail behind that because it's one of those great sort of full circle things where like they run the brand campaign. He's getting a lot of great brand effects from it. And even though they're a small company and they run a bunch of other motions, like they just had something they ran where they're trying to do ABM with Anthropic. Like, what was the catalyst of that for them? Because they're a pretty young company overall to be running something like that.
Yeah, and I don't want to steal any thunder because I wasn't really that involved with the campaign. And maybe this is another ask to have Tom jump on and he can.
Yeah, you should have Tom jump on. I'd be curious to get the story. But
yeah, he's an excellent marketer. We'd love to have him on if you're listening, Tom, or we'll make sure we send this to you. I think they just hearing him. He actually told a big room at an Exit 5 event that we're going to be running out of home, and I think a lot of what his rationale from what he described to a whole group of marketers was at his previous company, he kind of attacked demand gen or just growth in a different way, where he built a team of trained journalists to build thought leadership and authority and trust there. And I think when he got to Instant.io, a lot of what he's trying to do was a similar thing of just doing something different that maybe others in his space, weren't doing. And I think this goes into a little bit of what we talked about before in a sense of there's two parts to out-of-home advertising. It's the oldest medium there is, but there's the planning part, which, like the strategy behind finding out where your audience really is, and you can be strategic about putting out-of-home assets in front of them. And then there's the creative part. And I think telling that story in a succinct way is half the battle. It's just as important. But yeah, Tom thinks differently. And I think for them, it was, how do we try something? I think I'm going to paraphrase what he said at that event, but it was more around, we know it can work, or we know it works. And so we're going to make this investment, and we're going to pair that with the rest of our marketing mix. And we talk to customers all the time. We work with companies like his, we work with D2C brands. It's all over the mix. Part of what we help them understand is that we don't expect out of home to completely replace their digital advertising. It's you mentioned like the duality approach there. Like it should complement what they're doing there, because you're inundated with Facebook ads, you're inundated with LinkedIn ads, but you're missing out on the real world exposure that cannot be turned off by not utilizing out of home. It should be a compliment.
It's also the ultimate single image ad, isn't it? Out of home, it's just like, for companies that run lots of single image ads on Facebook or on LinkedIn and you're just one of several, like when you run your single image ad on out of home, like you're the single image ad that they're looking at, you know?
Yeah,
So
that's a great way to think about it. And it's blown up. It's not, it's
sure.
not 2 by 3. It's or on your iPhone. It can be pretty impressive, and it's that wow moment where someone sees it, especially if you're creative. You don't want to just duplicate your Facebook ads and throw that up on a billboard. It's not going to work.
It needs to be super short and to the point, and like people need to, we were talking about this before, but like people clearly need to understand who you are and what you do. Like I don't think out of home is the place to be clever, it's the place to be clear more than anything. And like you want to, ideally you'd have a couple of different sort of out of home billboards up, right, like in a couple different spots, and you want basically the same sort of, you want the same kind of presence, maybe with a few wrinkles sprinkled in. We were talking before just about what are some good out of homes that you see. And to me, I think some of the best that I see are lawyers. Honestly, I think lawyers do a really good job, all told, especially a couple. And you can like really compare it when you're looking at it, like ones who have a really distinct kind of brand identity when it comes to their billboard ads, and ones who are clearly just not thinking about the space because it's so much real estate. And it's like you want to take as much advantage of that real estate as you possibly can without oversaturating and confusing people or making them have to understand too much.
I think you nailed it with you don't want to be too clever. You want to stand out, but you want to be clear. And I think that's where the education needs to go into someone who's considering an out of home campaign is that on a billboard on the side of the thruway, you have a small amount of time. Even if the viewer, it's subconscious that they're seeing that repetition over and over again, where say, so you do have to be succinct, but on a transit ad, maybe for example, you have some dwell time. So someone waiting for the bus or the subway, you can tell a longer story in that format there. So there are options, but I think you're spot on on the creative process. It has to be, you don't want a URL with .com slash like
Yeah, exactly.
subdomain
Like going to
slash
your
like,
stuff.
yeah, you want to direct them to one place. You want to be really succinct, but yeah, you talked about, you gave that example of a legal ad, which I think a lot of people maybe associate out of home with their local law firms, but you don't think that, or you had mentioned this before, that SaaS brands that utilize out of home, you think maybe that, do you think they get a little too cute, or do you think that they're not direct enough of what they're trying to
I
educate
think
someone on?
I think it's a little bit of both, but I think mostly SaaS brands. And like I have a certain amount of, I get a certain amount of exposure to this, especially when I'm out west, because I'm right now in the Sacramento area. I drive to San Francisco quite a bit. So I get to see all the ads from I-80 in Sacramento all the way to when I reach San Francisco. So I see the full gamut of Drake the Lawyer, which is one of my favorites. And when I get into San Francisco, I see Zendesk, or I see a bunch of other brands doing like a lot of them. There's a lot of AI messaging, and I almost feel like those billboards that I see a lot in San Francisco, they're almost not for the consumer as much as they are for like other SaaS brands to notice, just so it's a show me, or yeah, we're doing AI too. But I feel like a lot of them are like AI powered, AI enabled this, or do this with AI. And I feel like for in this moment in time right now, it's a very abstract thing for a lot of the audience. Like everybody, including marketers and salespeople, are trying to get their arms around what AI can do for their business. Yeah, there's the echo chamber of LinkedIn where people are running these incredible AI automations with N8N or with Clay or with whatever. But like most people are looking at the solution and just wondering what the use case is. So I feel like a lot of companies who are running these AI enabled sort of ads or billboards in San Francisco in particular are just missing the forest for the trees a little bit. They're doing it to say that they're doing AI, but I think they're missing the larger point of what does our product do for people who maybe have heard of us but don't necessarily know what we do. And then let your AI messaging find its way when they get deeper into wanting to discover your brand. I feel like those billboard ads are the way that people will discover your brand, but they're not necessarily trying to discover what your brand does, at least from like a feature standpoint. It's more of an outcome standpoint, or like really broadly umbrella message what we do. So when I look at some of the billboards that I like, and they tend to not be SaaS brands, and they tend to have really clear calls to action. I talk about the law firms a lot because I think some do a really good job and some do a really poor job. My two favorites on I-80 are like Drake the Lawyer, because he really clearly has a certain typography, taps into the cultural zeitgeist a little bit, which I love. He'll have Kendrick Lamar lyric references. One tagline that he has on a lot of his, which is "Thank me later," which I also love a lot. He's got his face up there. And then when you go to his website, it's very much just an amalgamation of the billboard, which I also like. So it's just like it's keeping the brand consistent across not just your digital, but your non-digital touch points. The logo is basically the exact same. The color scheme is the same. You see his face there. It's actually a really good website overall. I went to it actually earlier this week and I was like, I wonder if this website is just horrible, even though I like the ads. And I was like, wow, this is actually a really good site overall in terms of like layout and everything and what it does. And then there's the other thing is he just has the real clear call to action. It's drakethelawyer.com. It's okay. I know exactly when I want to think of a lawyer, what I want to do. There's other ones too. When you're on the East Coast, like when you drive up 95 and you're going through Philadelphia, you're going through New Jersey. Remember the I Hate Steven Singer billboards? You remember those at all?
I've seen them. Yeah. I'm not from that area, but I've seen it. Yeah.
Yeah, so he's a jeweler, right? But like it's a really clear call to action, like I hate stevensinger.com. And it's just that's more of like curiosity, doesn't really explain what you do, but it is a really clear call to action. And again, all the real estate is towards that call to action, not necessarily like just this long kind of screed about what we're doing. So I think about out of home and I always think like simpler is better, like really clear call to action, and then get a little playful with the kind of cultural zeitgeist if you can. But really just these plays because it's really screen dominant. It goes back to the point of brand measurement where so many companies are stuck in the LinkedIn, Google duopoly. And like I look at brand plays now and I think video and I think build and I think out of home, I think CTV and I think things like that. And like ultimately what you're trying to do is just dominate the real estate and make people consume your entire message. And those are the sorts of mediums when you want to run brand plays that really help you do that, as opposed to single image or even thought leader ads on LinkedIn, which can be super ephemeral and really forgettable at the end of the day, especially if not buttressed against something that is very resonant when people are actually consuming it.
You said a lot of great things there. One thing for sure that contributes to a positive out of home campaign, and that's consistency. I think, and there's two parts to that. I think when you mentioned that law firm, Drake the lawyer, who's getting, I think hopefully there's a bunch of people are going to go check his stuff out now. The consistency thing is important because I'm assuming, I don't know what his ad buys are. I'm assuming he has purchased a consistent placement or multiple placements, and he's obviously changing out that creative message. But it's consistent in the fact that even if you're driving, say you're driving down whatever throughway, highway it is, and coming around the corner, it's going to be his ad. And you're almost changing the creative. So like you're sort of looking for it.
Mm-hmm.
The consistency there around the frequency of how often you're showing that ad is important. And I think because as we know, it's a combination of digital, it's a combination of their work computer, their phone, but they need to see impressions enough for them to act on that. And you acted on that. You went and checked out his website.
Sure.
We actually see that as a lot of, and you may not be in the market to hire a lawyer at that time, but you're intrigued by his messaging. We actually see a lot of campaigns that one of the measurements or byproducts of that exposure is their organic search goes up significantly because somebody sees that ad, they're in a safe spot, they'll go search for that. So it may not be, and who gets the credit for that? Direct traffic gets the credit for it, but it's really, they saw that exposure on a billboard, and we can actually measure that to show like who is exposed to ads versus a control group. But I think the other consistency you mentioned that's very important is the consistency around where you're sending someone to. It looks the same as your digital ads. It looks the same as your landing page. I think there's a consistent story there too, where again, people can feel like we have this huge canvas on a static billboard on the side of the throughway. Let's use it all up, where it's hard sometimes. Simplicity is harder sometimes than just being.
It is harder. Like I'm thinking about out of homes that I see that I don't like, and I tend to gravitate towards billboards just because that's what I absorb and remember the most. I know you can do subways and bus wraps and other things, but one of the worst ones that I always see are car dealerships, because like car dealerships just clutter everything. They want to put the truck in there and they want to have a natural background, and then they want to layer all the text on, and sometimes it has different fonts. And I'm just like, I'm overwhelmed by everything on this billboard. I'm retaining nothing of it. So you almost have to give yourself like a common sense test when you look at your creative and go, can I look at this in literally 1 second and understand it without wondering a thing about it? And then I think the other thing is one thing I always do. My wife is a scientist. She's not in marketing at all. My wife is my acid test for almost everything from a campaign standpoint. Cause like she's the kind of person, she's never going to answer a cold call. She's barely ever going to respond to an ad. Like her primary way of finding products is like going to trade shows, and everybody prefers to buy differently. That's the beauty of go to market at the end of the day, is like you're going to find people from all walks of life who have their preferred ways of actually engaging with your company and coming inbound or getting pulled through on outbound. But I always look at her and go, is this good? Did you get this? Did you get this? And like almost 90% of the time, we actually view ads the same way, where it's like it's effective or not. But sometimes like that smell test is a pretty good thing to think about. Marketers tend to consume so much ad inventory, so many ads, and they become connoisseurs of it. And then they get a little biased and they're thinking of what's good or not. So looking at it with just someone who doesn't absorb any of that stuff at all with any kind of intent was a good way to say, okay, is this message simple and resonant or is it not? Ultimately, people, when you're doing these sorts of ads to them, like they really want to understand it very quickly without having to think too much about it. The more you make anyone think about your ad messaging, the more it's going to fall flat and you're not going to get any lift from it whatsoever.
I love that. If you're in it day to day, we can get too insular in the idea of like how cute we are with messaging and such. It's hard to be simple. And I think it's also hard maybe to help clients. You work in an agency, you're working with a lot of different clients. It's probably hard sometimes for them to understand that less is more, maybe, or just we're not being as direct, or we sound like everybody else. And I think you see that online. But
you also see that with a lot of the AI ads, right? Like we sound like everyone else because everyone is saying AI this, AI that. It's almost the zag to not say that. And you can almost put a wink and a nod to it. Oh yeah, we have AI too. Just anything to like just zag away from what every other sort of inventory is looking like in the space that you're operating in.
You're right. Are you describing how AI is going to actually impact someone, or are you just saying you have AI to just say
For
that
the
you have
sake
AI?
of Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It's like at this point, it's a point of parity for most enterprise SaaS companies. And like, I
Yeah.
mean, I don't remember, to go back to the incident example, I don't remember the incident creatives having any kind of AI mention in it, or it definitely wasn't the focus of it, if I remember correctly. And then they did it like I think they just did London, right? They picked like one particular sort of area to do it in, or were they in multiple cities?
They've done multiple cities. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. We'll get Tom on to tell the whole story though. It is, that would be a really good use case for us to talk through our team's planning process and how we interpreted what they were trying to do and what Tom's vision was and just how it came about. But um,
You talk about measuring OOH, and I think like it's the same thing as measuring brand, right? You're looking at share of search, especially over time, and those tend to be long measurements, right? Like you looking at your share of search for your brand, you're looking at those normally through 6 month, 12-month sort of intervals, and that's the same with like brand advertising, right? Like I think about like some of the really great brand initiatives you'd ever see in your life. Like I think one of the first ones that comes to mind for me is like Monday.com, where they were just spending a ridiculous amount of energy on YouTube ads. And like you couldn't get on YouTube pre-roll without seeing Monday.com. And you know what? Like it worked because they did it like 2 years ago, and Monday.com is still the first project management platform I actually think of when I'm like thinking about being in market. So I think the other thing to not underrate is how long that brand resonance actually works for you when you nail it, because it's very lasting, right? Like I was talking to someone about the performance marketing versus brand marketing, and like performance marketing is a super transactional way to do advertising, right? It's I'm in it, I want it, or I don't, and then I don't come back and I don't remember you really at all after the fact, right? Brand marketing, when done well and consistently and to the same audience, it has a huge lag effect on your company where people will remember you long after seeing the ad, and also long after even being exposed to your brand for a while if you expose them long enough. So like we talk about the balance between like brand marketing and performance marketing, and brand is supposed to be this very broad sort of effort where you're trying to build a lot of memory structures around your company. And that's what out of home does, and that's what CTV does, and that's what podcast ads do as well. Like those do the exact same kind of thing. Yeah, you'll have the call to action and stuff, but I think about a lot of companies that I've thought of or bought because of that. Like I bought a Thuma bed basically off of all of the CTV ads I got for Thuma, and I was in market for a bed. I was like, yeah, I'll spend $3,000 on a bed end of the day. And I was definitely not wanting to go for a cheaper bed at that point. But like those sorts of efforts, like even though you don't get the immediate sort of performance marketing high off of getting that conversion. Like those things last and last and last. And then again, when it goes to that 95-5 rule, when 95% of your market's out of market, but when they do come to market, performance marketing really doesn't save the day for you there at that point in time, unless like performance marketing in and of itself is a much more expensive motion than brand marketing in the grand scheme of things. When you think about what you're spending to get in front of a wide swath of people to make them know who you are versus trying to get that small iota of people that are coming in market who maybe don't know what you are. So you have to do both and you have to do it well. And they're different executions entirely. Like to me, like a brand marketing is much more umbrella messaging. It's much more driven by creative, in my opinion, whereas performance marketing is much more about copywriting, messaging, frictionless conversion, handoff, things like that.
Yeah, Greg and I talk about this all the time of how creative is coming back, or it never went away. It just maybe got diluted a little bit, but there needs to be a mix of both. And I think Out of Home as a channel, it's used by both. We talk to a lot of performance marketers and we talk to brand marketers. And I think when you get to the crux of what they're trying to do, it's usually a similar goal. But like you said, measurement, it usually does take a longer time to be able to extend that out. But the campaigns that we see successfully run by brands, they do run for a longer period of time because they understand that investment is similar to maybe paid search or an SEO investment, that you don't turn that off. It's always on. It's just you're testing creative, you're iterating, but that's an investment. It's not just a one-off thing here and there. So
no, yeah, exactly. If you're going to do out of home or CTV and you're going to run it for 3 months and see what happens, you're going to be obviously super disappointed with it, especially if you're only going to have a limited number of creative that you run. Like I look at what a lot of B2C companies do on things like CTV, and I'm like, I always think how much B2B brands could borrow from it. There's so many that you just remember, like Row is a big one right now. Like I see so many Row.co ads for GLP-1s and stuff like that. And all of the framework of that messaging is portable for a lot of B2B SaaS brands, but they just don't think about their creative necessarily in that regard. But like it works. I wouldn't say it's cookie cutter because I think your product marketing and your messaging really matter there. But like when you got these AI video tools now, HeyGen, stuff like that, like this stuff is more available to you than ever. And so it's just like mapping out your creative strategy, figuring out like the messaging themes that you really want to test, and you really have to have contrast there. And then it's just measuring the lift that you get from that overall. And in a brand sense, you're looking at, like you said, share of search is the biggest leading indicator. In the long tail of it, you're measuring it against contribution margin, blended cost per conversion, things like that. But I just think like you're right. Like creative to me is coming back now more than ever. And I think it's having like really strong ideas for messaging variants, creative variants, testing frameworks, and then being able to kind of like look at those through an experimentation mindset and understand what works well and what doesn't.
it's a long-term investment. We have seen success with shorter-term campaigns for those that are in it for the long haul. Yeah, they test creative, they test placement. We've done this with certain brands where they want to test certain cities, and we'll do control groups, and we're testing different formats in cities. So it's the same thing you're going to do with digital ads. I guess one last question for you, Matt. Being at a digital first agency, like for others out there that they've got, maybe that's the majority of what they offer, but they have clients that are looking for different ways to execute or to add to their mix. It sounds like you're hearing that from your clients. What advice would you give to other agency folks who maybe have traditionally only done digital, but like how do they round out the whole mix with maybe a consideration for out of home?
Yeah, I think like today more than ever, it's super important, to my point that I said earlier, zag when other people zig. And so finding channels that people are, because there's no direct attribution to the channel, but you know it's effective because if you're thinking about just the psychology of people and what they consume, like billboards have been around, to your point, for like hundreds of years at this point. They're still here because they're effective. I would say like your job as an agency is to get your client exposed in the best way possible. And first off, like I don't think you can even worry about being efficient with ad spend until you can actually be effective with your ad spend. And so to me, focus on effectiveness first, and that's creative, and that's placement, and that's targeting, obviously, as well. And looking at channels or mediums that aren't direct response in nature, but can obviously have a huge lift for you guys, as long as you know what you're measuring and what you're looking for is like that first leading indicator. I think out of home for certain brands, especially ones that have like pretty wide serviceable, obtainable markets are really great choices, especially if you want to your point, do a geolift test in a certain city or compare metropolitans, for instance, especially if you have a concentration of customers or a concentration of prospects that are pretty like for like. That's essentially how people measure billboards before. I'm just finishing watching Mad Men with my wife right now. And like, that's essentially how they did it, right? They were like, we're going to run it in Detroit and we're going to run it in Cleveland. And then we're going to take a look at the difference between the two. And then that's the incrementality of it. So I think it's looking, you want to look to stand out. You want to look to do something where you're going to make your brand advertising more effective, but you obviously have to do proper planning and be smart about it and then understand what you want to compare the effort to ascertain whether it's effective or not. So I think like it's just doing that front end work to sell it and understands what you're trying to affect. And then, yeah, just running that test and then being able to measure it all the way through. And then to your point, wanting to give it enough time to actually tell whether it's effective or not. Like running a 30-day out-of-home campaign is going to fail 100% of the time almost. Even if you're going to try to surround sound an event, you'll get a little bit of lift from that. But I feel like it's more you want to pick an area and then run it and then measure it. But like I think doing like pulsing it in like 3-day time intervals, I feel like that's probably usually not the best use of it unless you're already doing something similar with another kind of brand marketing effort.
A lot of great thoughts. You understand out of home. You can see the value of it. So yeah, this was great. I think for anyone listening, I think some of the takeaways that you shared, a lot of this comes down to, I think, consistency. We talked a lot about the creative part, and there's the planning, there's the execution, which is probably more in our wheelhouse in terms of the data sources we use and such, but creative is a big piece to it. So I think, yeah, you brought up some really great points. And I think a lot for marketers and even agency folks to think about when it comes to, just what omni-channel counts as. There's real world applications there that out of home's a part of that shouldn't be forgotten. So
100%. And I also say just get outside the SaaS bubble when you're looking at out of home. SaaS is usually not the best archetype. There are many brands who have been running out of home for decades who are still do it because it works. And like, those are probably the examples you want to be drawing from more than your peers.
That's a good point. And we do some great work with B2C and D2C brands, and their creative they do some really cool creative stuff. Another great point. Look outside your bubble a little bit. I love it. Matt, where can people find you?
I'm on LinkedIn, still lurking more than posting, but I'm there. You can find me. And yeah, obviously Refine Labs, we're doing great work. I'm really excited about the work we're doing right now around brand measurement. We're really trying to work that muscle, really working to become a more AI enabled company as well. And then also really working on things around different sort of creative offers and package. So if you're in the market for B2B demand services, we definitely do that at a really high level with a high level of measurement as well. And we're definitely not afraid to get outside of our comfort zone with paid media, with things like out of home, with things like CTV, with things like podcasting. So definitely consider us if you're in the market for that. And yeah, you can find us on LinkedIn, Megan Bowen, myself, Evan Hughes, like we're there.
You guys are definitely there and you guys do excellent work. Definitely check them out. And we're excited to partner with you on some upcoming campaigns. So
yeah, we got one coming up I'm excited about. Yeah, non-SaaS too, which I'm also really curious to see how it does.
So we'll have your team on after that runs and we can talk through the whole process. That'd be great.
Yeah, that sounds great.
Matt, we appreciate you joining. And for all the listeners out there, thanks for tuning in wherever you're listening, either on a podcast platform, YouTube, or wherever else that is. We appreciate it and look forward to next week's episode. But this is for Beyond the Billboard and for Greg and myself. Thanks, and we'll talk to you next week.
All right, cool. Thank you, Charlie. Appreciate it, man.